I never really noticed Max, the golden retriever next door, until he started acting like he had a secret. He lived with the McInnes, a quiet family who moved in 2 summers ago and barely made more than polite nods across driveways. Max, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore, huge, friendly, loud, always barking like he just discovered a miracle behind their weathered brick house. Every afternoon, like clockwork, he'd dart to the same patch behind their shed and start digging like his life depended on it. One day, while I was watering my tomatoes, I saw him clawing at the earth like he was mining gold. Then, just as suddenly, he emerged with something long and bone-colored dangling from his mouth. He looked proud, triumphant, but also oddly secretive. Over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of Max repeating the ritual. Same hole, same treasure. Except what he was pulling up didn't look like sticks or chew toys. These were smooth, pale, curved. They looked disturbingly human. I told myself they couldn't be. Maybe deer bones or leftovers from a long-forgotten cookout. But the more I watched, the less convinced I became. I casually brought it up with Mrs. McKenna one morning while collecting mail. Her smile was tight, automatic. Max just digs up trash from the old owners. He's weird like that, she said. Her eyes didn't match her smile. That night, I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Max's excavation in my head. It wasn't just random digging. It was intentional. Like he was looking for something specific, or worse, something someone else had put there. I made up my mind. Tomorrow morning, I'd go behind that shed and see for myself what Max had really been burying. I told myself it was nothing. Just a dog and dirt. But I already knew better. The next morning, just after sunrise, I slipped through the gap in the hedges that divided our yards, heart thumping like I was committing a felony instead of a little suburban trespassing. The grass was wet with dew, and the air had that early morning quiet that makes everything feel more serious than it should. Max wasn't outside yet, and the house was still dark, blinds drawn tight as usual, so I crept around the side, toward the back of the shed where I'd seen him dig. The ground there was rough, uneven, and disturbed, patches of fresh soil layered over looser earth like someone had tried to cover up more than just a dog's instincts. I crouched, my fingers brushing the cold dirt, and started digging not fast, just slow enough to feel the weight of what I was doing, and within a few scrapes, I found something hard. My breath caught as I uncovered the edge of a bone, not broken or chewed, but whole, too clean, too long for an animal. And I yanked my hand back like it had bitten me. I wanted to believe it was from a deer, or a cow, or a Halloween prop someone forgot, but the shape was wrong, and worse, it wasn't alone. Beside it, barely a few inches deeper, was another, slightly smaller and curved differently. Like it belonged to a different body, or maybe a different part of the same one. I covered it back up fast, heart pounding, brain sprinting. I needed to tell someone, right? The police? Animal control? But what exactly would I say? Hi. Yes, my neighbor's golden retriever might have unearthed a crime scene. Instead, I stood there frozen in my muddy pajamas, unsure if what terrified me more was what I'd found, or the fact that the McInnes, who claimed Max just like trash, had to know it was there all along. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day, even while pretending everything was fine at work, smiling at emails and nodding through Zoom calls. My mind was replaying that awful scrape of dirt under my nails and the side of bone pale against the earth. By evening, I found myself staring out the kitchen window at the McInnes yard, half hoping Max would reappear and do something so innocently dog-like that it would make me doubt everything I saw. But when he finally padded into view, he walked straight to that spot behind the shed and laid down, resting his head on the disturbed dirt like he was guarding it. My stomach twisted. It wasn't guilt or grief in his body language. It was loyalty, the quiet, watchful kind. That night I dreamed of bones clinking in the dark, of Max pawing endlessly at a bottomless pit. I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, convinced I'd heard digging outside my window. I didn't sleep again. By the next morning, something shifted in me. Fear gave way to curiosity. Or maybe it was desperation for clarity. I needed to understand what I was seeing, even if I didn't want to. So I waited until the McInnes left, Mrs. McKenna backing out of the driveway in her silver Subaru with a wave, Mr. McKenna jogging past in headphones, and as soon as the coast was clear, I was in their yard again, this time with gloves and a trowel. The digging went faster now that I knew where to look, and deeper, revealing not one or two but at least 6 bones. Some with odd ridges, one with what looked like a scrape mark along the side, and then I found it. Buried just a little further down, wrapped in plastic, was an old leather collar torn, cracked, and attached to a rusted tag that read Charlie, and I swear, the second I read that name, Max started barking from inside the house, loud, urgent, like he knew what I'd found, and who it used to belong to. I backed away from the hole like it had burst into flames, heart pounding, dirt-streaked gloves still clutching the plastic-wrapped collar with the name Charlie etched deep into the metal tag. It wasn't just that it belonged to another dog, though that alone raised questions. It was the way it looked old, neglected, like it had been underground for years, hidden on purpose. Max was still barking from inside the house, sharp and insistent now, and I couldn't shake the feeling he wasn't warning the McInnes about me, he was warning me about them. I shoved the collar in my coat pocket and covered the hole quickly, clumsily, just enough to hide the mess, then slipped back into my yard like nothing had happened. All evening I sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the tag, wondering who Charlie was and why Max had dug him up, over and over, like he was trying to make someone remember. Finally, I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't thought to do before. I searched the local lost pet registries, scanning page after page of old listings, until I found one that made my skin go cold. Lost dog. Charlie, male lab mix, last seen near Glenwood Drive. Friendly. Blue collar. Reward. Call 555-9230 The post was dated almost 5 years ago, back when the McInnes had just moved in, before anyone knew them, before Max, and when I called the number, half expecting it to be disconnected. Someone picked up after one ring, their voice hesitant and low. Hello? I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I think I found your dog. Silence. Then, slowly, Charlie. The word cracked as they said it, like it had been waiting all this time just to fall apart in someone's mouth. Who is this? I told them my name, my street, the whole strange story. Another pause. Then, you said the McInnes? A long breath. They bought Charlie from us. But he didn't go missing. He died. The line went quiet. And they told us they buried him in their yard. I sat there clutching the phone, the silence on the other end stretching longer than felt natural, until the woman finally spoke again, quieter this time, like she was remembering something she'd tried to forget. He was sick, she said, late-stage lymphoma. We didn't want to let go, but the vet said it was time. They offered to take care of it. Said they'd give him a proper burial. That was part of the adoption deal. We were moving, and they promised they'd take care of him. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to someone who thinks their dog was laid to rest respectfully only to find out he's been dragged up like an old shoe toy by another dog? I mumbled some form of, I'm sorry, and promised to call if I found out more. She gave me her name, Nina, and her voice cracked again when she said, thank you for not just ignoring it. When I hung up, I realized I was shaking. Not from the chill in the room, but from something heavier, something that felt a lot like guilt, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering why Max was the only one digging up that spot. Why not the McInnes? Why leave him to do it over and over again? It almost felt like he was being told to dig, or worse, trained to. The next morning, I went back out, not to dig again, but just to look. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint line of disturbed grass running from behind the shed toward the back fence, like someone had dragged something heavy and tried to cover the trail. I followed it, step by cautious step, until I reached a spot where the fence boards looked slightly warped, like they'd been pried open recently and nailed back without much care. Max hadn't been burying bones, he'd been uncovering them from somewhere else and bringing them back. I couldn't shake the realization. Max wasn't just unearthing things for fun, he was retrieving them, almost like he'd been taught to fetch secrets instead of tennis balls. The warped fence made it clear something had been slipping in or out of the yard, and suddenly the idea that Max was just a quirky digger felt naive at best, dangerously blind at worst. I returned home and stared at the old collar again, fingers tracing the cracked leather and rusted buckle, feeling more like I'd stumbled into a crime scene than a dog's bad habit. And that's when it occurred to me, what if Charlie wasn't the only thing Max had brought back? What if there was more buried out there, things Max had found and hidden, over and over again, for reasons only he understood? I grabbed a flashlight and waited for nightfall. Once the McInnes lights went out, I climbed through the hedge for the third time, staying low, quiet, careful not to disturb Max if he was out. But he wasn't. The yard was silent, almost too still, the way a room feels right before someone walks in. I moved quickly to the path behind the shed and followed that faint trail again to the loose fence boards. When I pulled one aside, I expected more dirt, maybe a hole, but instead, I found a tunnel. It was narrow, low to the ground, barely large enough for Max to squeeze through, but it stretched under the fence and into the dense brush beyond the property line. I hesitated, every instinct telling me this was where smart people turned back, but I clicked on the flashlight and crawled in. On the other side was a clearing, tucked between backyards, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And in that clearing, Arranged in a rough circle like a child's idea of a ritual were bones, dozens of them, stacked neatly, some clean, some still clinging to scraps of cloth or plastic. And sitting in the center, as if waiting for me, was a toy. One of those squeaky ones shaped like a human hand. Except this one didn't squeak when I picked it up. It thudded, heavy, rubbery, and far too real. I dropped the hand so fast it landed with a dull thud, kicking up a puff of dry earth, and my flashlight beam wobbled as my hands trembled. I backed up a step, half tripping over something behind me, and when I turned to look, I found a shoe, just one, old, caked with mud, the sole split down the middle, and inside it was something stuffed deep and tightly rolled. Fabric, striped, like from a shirt. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't not. I pulled it free, slowly, gently, and instantly regretted it. The cloth unfurled to reveal something I couldn't unsee. A faded name tag stitched into the collar, McKenna Lawn Care. I stared at it, trying to remember if I'd ever seen anyone else at their house besides the husband, the wife, and Max. Had there been a son? A helper? A brother maybe? Someone they never mentioned? Someone who'd disappeared quietly, without enough questions asked? The bones weren't just Charlie's. This wasn't just some pet graveyard Max was curating. This was a secret, years deep, scattered and hidden by paws too trusting to understand what they were uncovering. My breathing turned shallow as I realized I had to leave, fast. But just as I turned to crawl back through the tunnel, a voice from behind me stopped me cold. "You're not supposed to be here." I froze. The light from my flashlight caught movement in the trees, just a flicker of a silhouette. But then another figure stepped forward, much closer. It was Mrs. McKenna. Calm, composed, and holding Max by the collar. "He always brings them back here," she said softly, like we were discussing something as mundane as garden weeds. "We tried to stop him. We really did." She crouched, her eyes on Max, not on me. "But I guess he remembers more than we wanted him to." And then she looked at me. "What exactly did he bring you?" I swallowed hard, pulse thudding in my ears, and held up the striped cloth without meaning to. My fingers moved before my brain gave permission. Mrs. McKenna's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered, a barely perceptible shift like a curtain fluttering behind a closed window. Max whined softly and stepped between us, ears low, tail still, like he could feel the tension vibrating in the air. "That belonged to my brother," she said quietly, almost tenderly, "but you wouldn't know about him. Nobody does anymore." I didn't say anything, not yet, just waited, heart pounding, dirt on my jeans, the flashlight beam trembling across the uneven pile of bones behind me. She looked out toward the trees, then back at me, her voice steadier now. "It was an accident, at least. That's what I told myself for a long time." Her hands were tucked into her cardigan pockets, but I noticed they were clenched into fists, white at the knuckles. "He lived with us for about a year after his divorce. Couldn't get his life together, always drinking, always shouting. Max was terrified of him," she added, her voice thickening. "One night, it went too far. My husband and I, we didn't mean to." But she trailed off, staring into the dirt like it held the end of her sentence. "You buried him?" I finally asked, voice hoarse. She nodded slowly. "We couldn't call the police. It was self-defense, but we panicked. We weren't thinking straight. So we made it look like he left. Max saw it all." Her voice broke on the last word. "And now, every time he digs, it's like he's trying to undo it." A silence settled between us that didn't feel empty. It felt like a decision was being weighed. Then she looked up sharply. "You didn't tell anyone yet, did you?" I hesitated, just a second, but it was long enough for her to know. She straightened. "You need to leave now," she said, her tone clipped, final. "And you need to forget what Max showed you." Then, more softly, "for his sake." But as I crawled back through the tunnel, heart hammering, the flashlight shaking in my grip, I knew one thing for sure. Max didn't want me to forget. That's why he showed me in the first place. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that circle of bones, that striped cloth, and Mrs. McKenna's face, controlled but cracked at the edges, like a dam about to give. I kept replaying her voice in my head, "for his sake." As if Max had some sacred secret that needed protecting, as if I was the threat now. I sat on my couch with the collar in my lap, and the flashlight still beside me, like evidence I couldn't hand over even if I wanted to. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I watered the tomatoes, waved half-heartedly at a neighbor, and tried to make coffee I didn't drink, but everything felt wrong, like the whole street was pretending nothing had happened, while I knew too much to go along with the lie. Around noon, I saw Mr. McKenna in the backyard, calmly raking leaves like nothing in the world was amiss. Max sat nearby, watching me through the slats of the fence, unmoving. It was like he was waiting for me to decide something, only I didn't know what. And then something strange happened. A delivery truck pulled up to the McKenna house, and a man got out holding a large cardboard box, the kind you only order when you're expecting to store something long-term. I watched from my window as Mr. McKenna took it around the side of the shed, disappearing for nearly 10 minutes before coming back alone, empty-handed. I knew I shouldn't have, but I waited till evening, then slipped back through the hedges once more. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity I couldn't shake, this time I didn't go behind the shed. I went inside. The McKinnis never locked it, maybe assuming no one would dare intrude on a gardening space. But tonight it felt less like a shed and more like a vault. I shined my flashlight around, and there it was, the box, unsealed, sitting on a work table. Inside wasn't what I expected. There were more bones, yes, but also old photographs, folded letters, a cracked picture frame, and at the very bottom, a leash, a simple blue leash. Frayed at the edge and stained dark near the clip. It wasn't Max's, it matched the collar in my pocket. Charlie hadn't just died, he'd been removed, just like the brother, just like the past, one layer of burial at a time. I took the leash and left the shed slowly, feeling like I'd disturbed something that didn't want to stay unearthed. My hands were shaking again, the kind of tremble that feels less like fear and more like recognition, because I knew now this wasn't just about secrets. It was about erasure, about rewriting stories so perfectly no one remembered the first draft. The McKinnis had been doing it for years, burying the inconvenient, smoothing the surface, and letting time do the rest, and Max, sweet, loyal Max, had been the only one trying to undo it. I sat on my back porch that night, leash in one hand, collar in the other, wondering what to do. The police? The press? Nina, the woman who'd called Charlie family? But all I could think about was Max, how he kept returning to the same spot, how he looked at me that day like he was begging me not to walk away. Around midnight, I saw movement in their yard again. Not a person this time, Max, alone, pacing the fence line. Head low, tail still, like he was waiting for something or someone, and then it clicked. I crept outside and whispered his name, Max. He froze, then slowly trotted over, eyes bright with something that looked almost like relief. I knelt and reached through the slats with the collar. He sniffed it gently, then did something I'll never forget. He rested his head against my hand and let out the softest, saddest sigh I've ever heard from a living thing. It didn't sound like a dog missing a toy. It sounded like closure. The next morning, I called Nina again and told her everything minus a few details that might have gotten me arrested, and asked if she wanted to meet Max. There was silence, then a quiet, yes. Yes, I do. I told her I'd bring him to the dog park on Saturday, same one from her old post, and when I hung up, I knew what I had to do next. Not expose the McKinnis, not yet, but get Max away from them, away from the graveyard he'd been tasked with remembering. It was time someone rescued him. Saturday morning arrived cool and quiet, and I stood in my kitchen staring at Max's leash on the counter, heart thudding like I was about to commit a crime, which, depending on who you asked, maybe I was. I waited until the McKinnis left for what looked like a grocery run. They always took the same route, same reusable bags, and the moment their car disappeared around the corner, I moved. I crossed the yard, slipped through the fence, and whistled gently. Max was already waiting, like he'd known. It would be today. I clipped the leash on without a fight, and as I led him through my yard, he didn't bark, didn't pull, just followed quietly, like he was finally being let off duty. When we reached the dog park, Nina was already there. Sitting alone on a bench beneath a tree, hands folded tightly in her lap. The moment she saw Max, she stood. Max paused, lifted his head, then slowly trotted forward, and I swear, in that instant, he seemed lighter, like something had lifted off his back. Nina knelt, touched his face gently, and whispered, "Charlie would have liked you," then buried her face in his fur. I looked away, pretending not to feel the lump in my throat. We talked for a long time after that. Mostly about dogs and grief and what we do with the stories we aren't supposed to know. I didn't tell her everything, not the shed, not the brother, not the circle in the woods, but I told her enough to explain why Max needed a new home, and she didn't hesitate. "We'll call him Charlie too," she said with a tired smile, "unless that's too weird." I laughed, and Max wagged his tail like it was the best idea in the world. I helped her load him into her car, and as they pulled away, Max looked back just once, and that was enough. Later that night, I stood in my backyard staring at the McKinnis shed. Now quiet, now still, wondering if they knew yet. And that's when I noticed it. My flashlight, the one I'd left behind during the last visit, was sitting on my porch, clean, wiped, and placed neatly on the top step like a gift or a warning. I stared at the flashlight for a long time before picking it up. turning it over slowly in my hands. There were no fingerprints, no scratches, just the faint scent of lemon cleaner and something metallic beneath it. It hadn't just been returned. It had been sanitized, erased, like everything else they couldn't fully control. I turned it on, half expecting the beam to flicker or fail, but it worked perfectly, steady and silent like nothing had happened. But something had. Everything had. Max was. Gone now? Safe, I hoped, with someone who would love him without expecting him to be a gravekeeper. But the McInnes? They knew I knew. And now we were both pretending again. Me, that I hadn't seen what I'd seen. And them, that they hadn't noticed Max's absence, the leash missing, the silence in the yard. For a week, they didn't say a word, didn't knock, didn't call, didn't ask, just went about their routines like nothing had changed. But then, one night, I heard it again. Digging, not frantic, not wild, but soft and methodical, like someone trying to uncover something without leaving a trace. I crept to the window and saw a figure by the shed. Not Max, not Mr. McKenna, but a boy, maybe 15, hunched low with a small spade in his hand. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the hoodie, the sneakers, the slow way he moved like he'd done this before. Then, a voice from the shadows. That's deep enough, Caleb. And out stepped Mrs. McKenna, holding a box, smaller than the last, but taped shut, sealed tight. I ducked away before she could look up, heart racing, breath caught in my throat. This wasn't over. Whatever they'd buried, whatever they'd hidden, it was still happening. And now there was a new name, a new player, maybe even a new story being written while the old one was still decomposing. I sat back on the floor, flashlight still in my hand, and realized with a chill that settled deep in my bones. Max hadn't been the only one trying to remember. He'd just been the first.